Well, let's look now at the Kenyan markets on the east of the continent. The NSE 20, the index there closing down at 4806, and that's 2/3 of a percentage point down. On the currency front, looking at the shilling there, 85.65. Yesterday it was at 85.5, and a 0.41 shift over there. Well, joining us now in the studio in Nairobi to give us an update on those Kenyan markets is Mwenda Rarama, who is research analyst at Kingdom Securities. Good afternoon to you, Mwenda. Let's just first take a look at the overall market, and then we'll look at some of the particular stocks, in particular Kenya Airways. But big picture first.
Okay. Kenya Airways in particular reported a loss today, about 7.9 billion in value, but mostly driven by the fact that revenues were down due to the fact that passenger numbers actually dropped quite a bit. We are not seeing a lot of expansion from them, with available seat capacity kilometers still remaining almost stagnated. That may have given insight into what exactly went on, because revenues were down about 9 billion. Leading to the 7.9 loss that we saw in terms of, at the close of the year. But of much interest, the fact that they actually did not pay a dividend this year, coming from the fact that they have been paying dividends consistently, then that gives us kind of a shock, and we don't know what exactly to expect going forward. Are they expecting that they may not continue performing, or are they expecting this rough patch that they're going through to actually continue going forward? We are yet to see what exactly you see through the first quarter and the first half of the coming year.
Mwenda, just looking at some of the comments, and as you say, the revenue down by 9 billion, the loss 7.9 billion, so a direct relationship there, and obviously their costs remaining relatively stable. So this is not a cost issue, it's a revenue issue, and the oil price actually was favorable to them.
Yes, it is a revenue issue, and we saw it even through the half-year results. Actually, revenues dropped down even at the half-year. So they have a revenue issue, and they have been struggling with it for a while. And we are hoping they'll do something, mainly explained by the fact that the Dreamline has also delayed. But other than that, I think there's a big issue in terms of revenue, and KQ needs to look into it and see what they can do about pumping up their revenue. The expansions in Africa are bearing some fruits, but most of the other markets are actually on a downward trend. So they're not getting as much, and competition has really gone up in the last year. So that may explain the reason why the revenues are not spiking as much as they have been year on year in the past years.
Well, some of the factors that they list as affecting the revenue, Eurozone economic challenges, and presumably that's a reference to tourism into Kenya, travel advisories because of fears of violence, retaliatory attacks from Al-Shabaab, and of course the election uncertainty, which would have lasted a few months prior to the election in March. Now, presumably that can change. So in a sense, some of the reasons that they cite could be temporary.
They could be temporary, but other than that, they also have the internal issues that they need to deal with. Other than the fact that they also have external impacts of the euro crisis and a lot more that has been going on, because the global markets have not been doing as well as we have seen them in the past. But other than that, they still also have their own internal issues with the few delays they are seeing, and the fact that the available seat kilometers are not growing also points to the fact that they may need to grow their capacity if they are going to be able to grow their revenues. Going forward.
They do distinguish between direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs, they say, relatively stable at 77 billion shillings. Total costs up 20%, and that was part of the reason why they had a staff rationalization process. So costs do still seem to be an issue, although revenue is the real problem. Of course, it's a delicate line. You do staff retrenchments, you affect morale, and maybe you affect the performance of the airline.
Yeah, true that, and we have seen a lot of that in that year. That might also explain the fact that we have not seen a very good performance from them. Their staff have been complaining, their staff have been on strike for quite a number of times. So that also led to the fact that the revenues were down. But their biggest problem may not be cost currently. I think they need to focus more on revenue. If revenue is not growing, then no matter how much you cut your cost, the bottom line will also not grow.
Well, that's right, and eventually you can't fly because you've cut your costs too much. What sort of position is there in terms of what I would call the strategic airline flying and the commercial airline flying? There might be some pressure on Kenya Airways to do certain flights in the African continent and elsewhere. and on the other hand, some of them may not be commercially viable. Do they have to worry about that kind of mix? And of course, government is a very interested party in this. They would like to know that Kenyan Airlines is supporting the strategic intent of the country.
I think over the years, given that the last decade has seen a lot of support from the government has actually taken quite a back seat in terms of the running of these companies. Because today's government, the Kenyan government that we have today actually seeks to make some revenue and make profits out of it and get some dividend out of it. So they don't really interfere much in terms of the running of the company. So that may not be a very big problem for them. In the past it was, but right now as we look at them, KQ have the leeway to actually make the decisions on which flights to actually take into Africa. And given that they are looking to create a hub in Africa, that may explain why they may be increasing in terms of the flights that they take. They've seen them taking up a lot of Embraers, trying to make sure that they actually lay their base, which is Africa, and get hold of it as well as they can, and create the JKA as a hub to basically link Africa to most of the other continents.